Okay, so I've got the X-Carve Pro behind me, and we've been showing off a bunch of different applications on how you can build a cabinet. In a recent video, you can see how we built a really simple cabinet frame, but if you're gonna be building a cabinet, more than likely, you're gonna be putting some type of door on it. So in this video, we're gonna walk through how to build this guy. If you make cabinets, this is probably a really popular design that you already use. It mimics the rail and style design of more traditional shaker doors, but since it's out of MDF, we can carve it out on the X-Carve Pro. So to cut this out, we're going to be using the 4-piece shaker door set, which you can find a link for down in the description. And it consists of a fairly large bit for planing out large pieces of material. So that'll be the big pocket that's in the middle. And then we're going to use an 1/8" spiral flute, and we're going to use that to take out the corners that this big bit is going to miss. And then we've got a 1/4" compression bit that is going to cut out the door, so the outline that goes all around the outside. And then we're going to finish everything up with a 60-degree V-bit. And this is going to give us our nice chamfers all around the edges, both on the outside as well as the inside pocket that we took out with our big bit. Okay, so now we're gonna be jumping inside of Easel. And I've got this project linked down below in the description if you want to follow along. So when you open it up, you're going to be looking at 4 different workpieces down here at the bottom. This could be minimized. You just click that, and that's going to flip this back up. And a quick aside before we actually jump into the full project, we do a full walkthrough of Easel step by step, go through all the different settings and all the different details in this video when we actually designed our case for our cabinet, and you can follow along there. We're not gonna go as deep into those settings here, but I want to give you an overview of what the process looks like for making a door. So over here on the far left is our entire door with everything we're going to need to carve it out. So it's pretty much this guy. But with how Easel works, we actually need to split up some of those tool paths because we can't carve/cut them out all from the same one. So again, we're using 4 different bits, so we want to split that out into different work pieces so that we can do that. So this is kind of like the master. Maybe you imported your design from a different program, or you created it directly inside of Easel. In this case, we did make it inside of Easel because it's just 2 different rectangles that we gave dimensions to. You can see if we click the inner pocket, we have a cut that is a 1/4 inch down, and it is clearing out that pocket. Then if I click on the outside, you can see that we are cutting out the entire shape, and this is going all the way down. We're using 1/2" MDF as our material, so this is set to 1/2 inch, and we are cutting on the outside of the path. And that is because the dimensions of 11.5 by 29, that is what we actually want our door to be. So you want to make sure and set that to the outside, because if you didn't and you set that to the inside, then the width of your bit when you're doing that cutout path, which in this case is going to be 1/4 inch, it's going to be 1/4 inch in on all sides, or even if you selected cut on the path, then it's going to be 1/8 inch because you're going to have half of the bit going on the side that you don't want. So anytime you actually want the dimensions, make sure you're selecting cut on the outside of the path. Now, one thing that's nice to do with these work pieces, especially if you're going to be breaking them out, is to leave notes on what you're actually going to be doing. So if you didn't know, on this drop down, you can hit this notes feature, or if there is a note, there will be this icon, this little note icon that you can hit. And you can see this is do not cut. This is the overall design. A couple notes, this is a 2.5 inch frame, the dimensions, and again, do not cut this out. And again, that 2.5 inches, that is the distance here to here, as well as here to here. So what I did from here is I just duplicated this design. So I just up here, hit duplicate, and then I went in and deleted the things that I didn't want to do. So I'm actually going to delete that because that is what this guy is. And then if you come over here to the notes for this workpiece, you can see that I've got step 1 and step 2 listed out as far as what you're going to be doing. So the first step in an entire operation is going to be pocketing out this big guy right here. Again, we're going to be using an 1 and an 1/8 inch bit, so this 1.125 that we're going to use to cut that out. Now that's going to be our first step. And you might be wondering how you actually get that bit inside of Easel. To do that, you can come up here to the toolbox and come over here to bits, and then you can go add a bit, and you can do custom. Now I have already gone through this process. You would type in the name, you would put in the bit type, which we're going to call this just a upcut. We're going to call this just a test. And then you just put in whatever cutting diameter that you want. Now I've already got this in here, so I'm actually going to exit out of this and then go back into the toolbox. And you can see that I've got it set up right here. The spoil board flattening bit is the 1.125. And that's the same process that I also used to go in and put in my compression bit, the 1/8 inch spiral flute, as well as the 60-degree V-carve bit here at the bottom. Now before we carve, let's talk about our cut settings. If you click cut settings right here, you can see that we have set this to 100 inches per minute, a plunge rate of 34, a depth per pass to 1/8 of an inch, and a speed of 18,000 RPMs. Now since we're using this shaker door set, we're actually using the default values that the manufacturer gives us. So I'll include this instructional PDF in the description as well. But you can see for our flattening bit, here are our settings. So 100 inches per minute, 34 on the drop down, and a max depth per pass of 1/8 of an inch. And then you can see down here the cut settings for the rest of the bits that we're going to be using in the future. So when you're looking for the cut settings, make sure and reference this if we don't already have these automatically stored inside of Easel for you. Now before we actually carve, the one key thing that you're going to want to do is actually home your machine. So to do that, if I come up here to carve, it's going to give me this message that's saying, hey, you need to home your machine because you haven't done that already. So I'm just going to hit home the machine. Now at this point, our machine is homed. And what this allows us to do is to set a work 0 position. So when we're doing multiple cuts or multiple carves, it always starts those from the same position. Now I've actually already cut this guy out. If I put the material back on the machine, you can see from where we cut the door out, the work 0 is right here, while our home position is right here. Now we set this work 0 when we go through our carve menu process. So we're gonna put a new piece of material on this guy, and then we're gonna go through this menu. We're gonna hit carve. We're gonna go confirm material thickness. It's a 1/2 inch. Material is secure. We're going to be doing a roughing pass. We'll show you what this detail pass is here in a second. That's something we set up to be able to do our next step. We're going to hit continue. Again, we're using that 1 1/8 inch bit. And then we're going to set our work 0. First, it's going to set your Z work 0, which is our Z probe. And this allows the machine to know the distance between the bottom of the bit and the top of the material. So once we run that probe, then it's going to ask you to confirm your work 0. So for this step, this is going to be a new work 0. So again, if we're using our previous carve as an example, our work 0 was something kind of like this. Now the reason I didn't have my work 0 at the same spot as my home position was just because I had a clamp up here in the corner. I wanted to make sure to clear that clamp whenever I did my carve. Now if you're trying to save material, you might want to have that set up different, but just in this case, that's what I was doing. So once you have your 0 set in your X and your Y, at this point you're going to be able to save it. Again, you just did your Z, so that's good to go. So you're going to hit use new position. Then you're going to raise the bit. You're going to attach your dust shoe, turn on your spindle. Now one quick thing with my machine, this is actually a pre-production unit, so my dust shoe looks a little bit different than what yours looks like, but just know the general process is the same. You'll want to turn that on, especially when you're doing MDF, to be able to suck up all those chips and all that dust. Okay, so that big pocket operation was step 1. Our second step is to clean up the corners in that pocket. Now this is what that cut's gonna look like directly off the machine. And you can see our corners are gonna have a pretty big radius because we're using that bigger 1 1/8 inch bit. We wanna get this as square as possible. You can come back and do this with a chisel, but since we have a CNC, might as well use that. And to do that, we're gonna be using a detail bit. Now I've already got mine added in, but if yours isn't, you're gonna hit this arrow. You're going to select your detail bit. So in this case, it's that 1/8 inch spiral flute. And you can see that that has been added in. So once we have that 1/8 inch bit set, you can come over here to our cut settings. You can see there is a separate setting for that. So again, we're using the manufacturer recommendations of 40, 20, half the diameter of the bit, so 0.0625, and then 18,000 RPMs. One thing you want to make sure too is you're using a ramp when you're going down, and so to be conservative, you could use a 5-degree ramp. And so this is just when the bit is plunging down, it's coming down at an angle, and that's going to give you a lot less wear on the bit. It's also going to make the cut cleaner. It's just going to help the performance overall. You could use a steeper angle, and that just means that you're going to be able to actually cut this out or carve this out faster. But for this design, we really don't have a ton of ramp, so the time savings really won't matter. So it's always best to play it safe when you're first doing one of these and set this to 5 degrees. Now if you hit simulate and you come over here, you can kind of get an idea of what is going on. So that green toolpath is our flattening bit, so our big large bit. So if I run this, you can see that it is going to run all the way through. And then we're going to come back, with our 1/8 inch bit. So it's going into just the corners, cleaning up those edges and giving us those really nice crisp corners, at least as crisp as you can get with a 1/8 inch of a bit. This is also nice because it gives you a good estimate on the time. So you can see we're gonna have 6 minutes for our flattening operation and then 9 minutes for our detail bit. So once everything looks good, we're gonna come back up here to carve. Again, we're gonna go through the carve menu, but when you get to the pass type, make sure and hit detail pass. Then you're gonna go hit continue. Make sure your bits are good to go. You're gonna need to probe your machine again because as we put a new bit in there, the distance between the end of the bit and the top of the material is going to change. So anytime you change your bit, you're always gonna have to run your Z probe operation again to get a new Z height. But when it comes to confirm work 0, you don't need to change this. So even if your machine is positioned not at the work 0, hit use last position, then Easel is just gonna use the last work 0 position. So in this case, it's the one that we set during our big pocket operation. So you always use the use last position for our next 3 tool pass. All right, coming over to the next workpiece. If I hit the notes, you can see this is going to be step 3, and this is cutting out the parts with 1/4 inch compression. So now with this one, all I've done is I have set the depth for that middle piece. Remember, it was 1/4 inch. I've just set that to 0. So I don't even have it deleted. I just set it to 0. That's an easy way to make sure things don't actually send to the CNC to run, but you still want to have that object saved in there. And I actually did the same thing on this workpiece as well. I actually have the outline in there. I just had it set to 0. Now, for the most part, this step is pretty much like all the other ones. The only thing that is going to be a little bit unique with this one is we're going to be using tabs. So you can see this is selected right here, and all the tabs are little pieces of material that are going to connect your main piece to the larger piece that's being cut out of. When you have that selected, you can see that you're going to have several settings. These are the automatic ones, so your length, your height, and your quantity. So we can jump this up. And you can see these little yellow dots, those are the tabs. Now it places those automatically, but you can also move them around. So I can drag this around to the best place that I want. Now, depending on your setup, you may not even be using tabs. Maybe you're holding this down from underneath. Maybe you're using the tape and the super glue trick where you have 2 layers of tape with super glue underneath that holds the material flush. But if you're using clamps, you're gonna wanna make sure and use tabs. Now, typically you'll want to run whatever operation is going to cut out your piece at the very, very end. But we're not doing it in this case because our next operation is the V-carve bit. That's actually cleaning up these cuts and giving us a chamfer. So you want that to be the last operation because it's gonna give you a cleaner final look. But since we're using tabs, the piece isn't gonna move around, so we're not gonna need to worry about it. And then coming over to our cut settings, we've got 110, plunge rate of 55, our depth is equal to the diameter of the bit, or 1/4 inch, and then 18,000 RPM. You'll go through the carve menu just like before, make sure to 0 with your probe as always, and then use last position when you're going to confirm your work 0. And then we'll run this toolpath. Okay, so now our piece is getting really, really close to looking like the final product. The last thing we want to do is give a chamfer to all of our edges. We're going to be using that 60-degree V-bit to do that, and we're going to be going around both the inside of the pocket as well as the outside of the actual door. Okay, so for that V-bit, we're gonna come over to our last workpiece. You can see we have this set to our 60-degree V-bit. And again, we're using our recommended cut settings. So 90, 30, the diameter of our bit, which is 0.25, and then 18,000 RPM. Now for this one, we did have to change a few things. First, nothing is hidden. In fact, everything is going to be set to the depth that we want our chamfer to be. In my case, I have this set to 1/8 inch, both on the inside pocket and the outside edge. But then the other thing you want to make sure and do is set all of these tool paths to cut on the shape of the path. And that's because with our V-bit, we want that tip to go right where the center of that path is going to be. And that's going to give us that nice chamfer as that bit is going down into our material. So once we have those set, again, we go to the carve menu. We're going to make sure and probe again for the Z height. And last but not least, make sure and use last position for our work 0. And then once you're done, you're gonna get a piece like this. All you'll need to do is pop this out of the tabs, and then you're gonna sand, finish, and paint this however you need. Now again, this is another video in our cabinet build series. If you want even more information on how to actually design directly inside of Easel, as well as what a potential cabinet design could look like for this door, make sure and check out next link. So we can't wait to see what you guys come up with a combination of the X-Carve Pro as well as Easel Pro, and we'll see you in the next video.